So as Fred said, I'm a graduate fellow. I mean, I'm also a PhD candidate here, and I'll be done soon, I hope. You know, even though I'm an IU student, I live in Washington. I've been there for nearly 2 years now. And I just want to say that I'm seeing so much great research coming out of IU and informatics in particular in the area of cybersecurity. So it always makes me really, really happy to see a press release or a paper at a top-tier conference coming from my peers. It brings me great pride, and I hope some of you will come to Washington. Fred seems to live there, but I hope that the rest of you will swing through. If you have fantastic research that you think will impact the policy arena, let me know, and I can try and set up meetings between congressional staffers and you, or the FTC, lawyers. I mean, if you know that companies are not doing the right thing, or are leaking data, or are not securely protecting their users' information, please reach out. So as Fred said, I'm a researcher, but I'm also an activist, right? In many ways, I sort of launder my activism with this cloak of academia just to make it more respectable. And my research is really focused at the intersection of privacy, security, law, and policy. I used to be a computer security guy. I used to write code, and I got a little bit disillusioned because computer scientists usually will write their paper, propose their scheme, publish their paper, and then move on to the next thing, and it never reaches the hands of users. Right? And so, you know, we live in a society today where the cryptographers have got zero-knowledge proofs and all these fancy cryptographic schemes to protect data, yet our data is going over Wi-Fi networks in the clear. Right? Companies are not using the tools that you are building. And so my time and energy has gone into sort of pillorying companies and government agencies into using these technologies that you are building. My dissertation research is focused primarily on the role that companies, internet service providers, play in assisting or resisting the surveillance of their customers. And so the talk today that I'm going to do is really focused on a lot of this research, right? How often do companies provide our data to law enforcement and intelligence agencies? What data can they be forced to disclose? How much money do they make for helping? Because none of this stuff is free. And then more importantly, which engineering and legal or policy decisions impact the degree to which companies can resist or assist the government. There's actually a strong degree of flexibility that companies have when they design their products, right? And so you as technologists, some of you will go out into academia, but many of you will go into industry, and when you're building products, you can put privacy in your products. You can protect your customers' data better than a lawyer can if you build the things in on day one. So I really want to talk about and highlight some of the things that companies do, maybe unknowingly, to protect their customers' data. So part one, how often does the government get our data from internet companies? Right, before we can talk about how companies are protecting it, let's talk about how often this happens. So in the old days, communications intercepts happened, you know, with agents climbing up telephone poles. We're all familiar with, you know, the Hollywood movies in which, you know, an agent is hunched over a set of headphones, right? The reel-to-reel tape recorder is collecting the call. But that isn't how intercepts happen. These are how modern intercepts happen. A few keystrokes, and you get the call. You get the email. You get the location data. Similarly, in the movies, search and seizure involves agents breaking into your home. In fact, I know this perhaps more than anyone. They break your front door down and they seize your files. They walk out with hard drives and CDs and DVDs. But we store our data in the cloud, right? And do you think Google's servers get seized? Do you think Google is getting 4 a.m. visits and data center doors being broken down? No. Right? When the government gets data from Google or Microsoft or Facebook or Yahoo, the companies just burn it onto a DVD. So this impacts our privacy in a big way, particularly because modern surveillance scales way better than previous surveillance. Right? So in the old days, to intercept someone or to monitor someone, you know, you would have a team of agents sitting outside the home. You would have law enforcement officials listening to the call in real time, seeing whether it was relevant or not. If you wanted to tail someone, you need 4 or 5 cars. You don't want the same car tailing the suspect all over town. Right? Today, you just need 1 or 2 agents. Right? The previous bottleneck was the number of investigators, but today the bottleneck is really the time required to go through the data, not to acquire the data in the first place. And as an example, consider this. To search 5 more homes requires a huge number of agents. But to get 5 more inboxes from Gmail, this requires a few more lines in a court order or subpoena. All right, so the information I'm going to present in this first section is primarily based from statistics that are published by government agencies regarding the law enforcement surveillance that happens in this country. For some things, there are official stats. In some of these cases, they're published on the US court's website. In other cases, I've filed freedom of information requests, which I've filed dozens of them over the last few years. Because I live in Washington, and Washington is a source of constant leaks, I've gotten many documents leaked to me. And I've also used some other interesting methods to get data. One of my primary research methods involves going out drinking with companies' lawyers and getting them to tell me stuff after the fact. It's really effective. So there are a few surveillance methods I'm going to talk about. The first one is wiretaps. This is the one we know the most about. So wiretaps are real-time interceptions of communications content. Telephone calls, text messages, instant messaging, email messages in transit, not once they reach a server, web browsing as they happen on the wire. So, as a general trend, wiretaps increase every year. States and federal requests just go up every year. So this is a graph that I've produced of the number of wiretaps between 1987 and 2009. You can see that the federal numbers are really slowly creeping up, starting about in the range of about 300 a year in 1987, peaking in 2004, just I think over 600 or 700, but not moving too much. Whereas the blue line is the states, and this is just shooting up. Now this actually isn't all the states. There's a couple states that are responsible for over, I think it's California and New York are responsible for over 50% of the wiretaps themselves alone. And what's happened is that both LA and New York have special drug task forces that specialize in wiretapping, and so they are responsible for a lion's share of the wiretaps. But the general trend here is that this form of interception is increasing. But even with these numbers, we're not seeing huge amounts, right? 2,500 wiretaps from state, and then maybe 600 from the feds. We're looking at 3,000 or so wiretaps a year for a country, with what, 350, 400 million people. It's not that much. A general trend: drugs are bad if you value your privacy. Right? So these are the crimes that are investigated using wiretaps. You can see that I think it's nearly 90% of wiretaps are used for narcotics investigations. The theory that I have is that, and I haven't been able to confirm this, but the theory that I have is that drug investigations pay for themselves. You investigate someone for trafficking in narcotics, you bust their house, you seize 500K in drug assets, police get to keep that money. And wiretap investigations are really expensive. The companies charge a few $1,000s, you need overtime for the police. What you do in murder investigation, you're not seizing assets. So I think that may be one of the reasons why we're seeing so many drug investigations here. But if you're going to break the law, you don't want to be wiretapped, you really should stick with something safer, like murder, bribery, or extortion. You look at these numbers and they really speak for themselves, right? With 2,300 intercept orders in 2009, these are the federal ones, I think, or no, these are state ones. Narcotics are the lion's share of the requests, right? This, I think, speaks for itself. Drugs are where the surveillance is happening, yes?
You mentioned this is at the state level?
I think so.
Do you think that it would be different at a federal level?
No, the numbers are the same across the board, I think. I actually think, I need to check. I think these are state, because I need to check. But the percentages are about the same. It's about 90%. Yes?
I was just wondering, so the data that you showed on the previous slide, where's the data from?
The wiretap reports. If you Google for the word wiretap report, you'll see a long document produced every year by the courts.
Right. I was just wondering, so these are wiretap. So my understanding was, under certain acts, you don't even have to publicly specify that a wiretap has been asked for. So let me clarify. These are law enforcement investigations. These are not intel. This is not FISA.
terrorism or spying.
Yeah, that's
This,
what I was saying.
yeah, so this is law enforcement investigations. All right, and another thing, phone surveillance increases every year while other forms are declining. The states really are going hog wild for phone surveillance. So the surveillance reports reveal different kinds of surveillance. So you have phone intercept orders, you have electronic intercept orders, which are faxes, pagers, email, network communications, and the blue line here are phone intercepts, and the things that are too small to notice, those are the non-telephone intercepts. So in 2009, 95% of all intercept orders were for portable devices as well. So mobile phones are really where the wiretaps are happening. So you can see here that your chance of having your home or your business telephone intercepted is slim to none. Mobile phones are the things that are being monitored. In addition to that, law enforcement agencies are not engaging in network or computer intercepts for the most part. In 2008 and 2009, there were less than 5 federal network intercepts. Right? We like to think of deep packet inspection being performed by law enforcement agencies. It's not happening. It's definitely happening by the intelligence agencies. But the cops in Iowa don't have the resources or the skills or the interest to be engaging in real-time surveillance of computer networks. But again, this is law enforcement only. One of the main reasons here, why do you need to tap something in real time when you can go to Google and get it after the fact, or go to Comcast? Because companies are retaining data for so long, you don't need to get it as it crosses the wire. You can get it later at a cheaper cost and with a much easier court order to get. So instead of an intercept order, you can use either a probable cause warrant, or you can use a relevance to an ongoing investigation order. So many people in the room, this is a security community, so we all know what encryption is. For years, the FBI has been complaining that with encryption, they're going to go dark. So this is the FBI director, this is the old FBI director, Louis Freeh, saying, the looming specter of the widespread use of robust, uncrackable encryption is one of the most difficult problems confronting law enforcement agencies. Right? Uncrackable encryption will allow drug lords, spies, terrorists, and even violent gangs to communicate about their crimes and conspiracies with impunity. Really powerful language, right? How can you, as a congressman or senator, say no to this? This is such a scary threat. Drug dealers using encrypted phones. So in response to this threat, before they passed legislation mandating backdoors in encryption, which is what the FBI wanted, Congress said, let's get some stats. Let's do data-based policymaking, which is a great thing and so rarely happens in DC. They said, let's get some stats published every year on the use of encryption encountered during intercepts. So every time the police encounter an encrypted communication during an intercept, a lawful intercept, they have to disclose it to the courts. They have to disclose whether the information was encrypted and whether the encryption stopped them from getting what they wanted. So these are the stats. As you can see, there are less, the high point is 34 instances in 2001, and the number of instances in which encryption has stopped them from getting what they want, 0, every year. So in 2010, late last year, the FBI started again saying, we need backdoors. The terrorists are using encryption. But then when these stats were pulled out, the FBI said, oh no, those stats, yeah, they're wrong. Sorry about that. We're going to have new stats, though. Don't worry, these ones are going to be really good, and these are going to show how much of a problem it is. Now, it's unclear whether this is actually indeed a problem. Certainly, I think they are encountering encryption, but I think by and large they're encountering encryption when they seize devices, right? The encrypted laptops, the encrypted desktop computers. But those aren't intercepts; those are just regular seizures. Up until given that most of the wiretaps we're seeing are telephone intercepts, that you can't go to Best Buy and buy a crypto phone. There's no encrypted voice calls for the iPhone. So when are they going to encounter this? The only real instance they would have done it on a computer would have been Skype. Just last year, there's now a new app for Android called Red Phone that lets you make encrypted voice calls. But these are really emerging technologies, and so I don't think they're encountering this that much, but what is probably the case is that they are talking about Skype. I think most people suspect that Skype can give intercept capabilities to the intelligence agencies, but it's certainly not the case that the police in a small town in Wisconsin are getting Skype intercepts. And so I think the police are complaining about that. All right, so the wiretaps are real-time interceptions of communications content. What about non-content? So law enforcement loves metadata, right? Using metadata, you can figure out the social networks of these groups. You can figure out the hierarchy. You can figure out who's at the top of the organization, who's giving the orders, who's receiving them, who are the power players, what times of day they're sending things, where they are. And so non-content requests in real time include the IP headers, to and from information on email, the phone numbers dialed, and in some cases, geolocation data. So there are stats. Congress requires that the Department of Justice collect and submit stats on the use of pen registers by DOJ. These stats don't include surveillance by the states. They also don't include pen registers and other non-content requests made by agencies outside of DOJ, such as the Secret Service and Customs. There's another problem, which is that even though they're required to submit these reports, DOJ doesn't actually submit them. So in 2004, Justice submitted a single document dump containing reports for 4 years. Again, in 2009, they sent another document dump, this time containing 5 years worth of data. So these reports, when they did finally show up, were not made public by default. So EFF filed a FOIA request for the first bunch, and it took them 3 years to get them. There's and the 1999 ones were only submitted in 2004. EFF got them in 2007. So 8 years after the actual pen registers were occurring. It took me a year to get them. In response to this, Justice now says that was the old administration. That was the Bush administration. We're really sorry about that. But the Obama Justice Department says that they have now instituted policies to actually send these to Congress every year, and they're actually promising now to put them on their website. Although that hasn't happened for this year yet, but they're telling me that it will be happening. All right, so anyway, we do have stats now. Pen registers and trap and traces. Pen registers are the outgoing, and trap and traces are the incoming information about calls and communications. The short thing to note here is that we're getting about 14,000. We're getting about 11,000 pen registers a year that impact about 14,000 people. What you should remember here is we only have like 2,500 to 3,000 wiretaps a year, and we have 1,200, 1,100 pen registers. So non-content requests are coming in at significantly higher numbers than content requests. And one of the reasons is it's much easier to get a pen register. It only has to be relevant to an investigation, whereas the wiretap, you have to really work hard to get it. Judges basically rubber stamp pen register requests. And of course, these are only the federal numbers. And as we saw, the states are submitting massively more wiretaps than the feds. It's equally likely that the states are submitting massively more pen registers than the feds. All right, so we had content, non-content, now location. And there's a general theme that you should see here, which is that we have the most information about wiretaps, and as we go to other kinds of surveillance, we have less and less information. So use of location data has become a routine tool for law enforcement and intelligence agencies. This includes both historical information and real time, so tracking you moment by moment as you're walking around. The data can be approximate from a single cell tower, indicating that you're within a kilometer or a few kilometers of this tower, or it can be far more accurate for real-time surveillance. It can be either from the GPS chip on your phone or multi-tower triangulation based on the time of arrival and the signal strength and a few other things. Al Gadari, who's a lawyer who represents a bunch of the phone companies, has stated that the carriers are getting thousands of these requests per month, and that the amount has grown exponentially over the past few years. Unfortunately, we have to rely almost entirely on things from the carriers because there are no official stats regarding these requests. According to the Ninth Circuit, in 2009, law enforcement agents pinged users of just one service provider, Sprint, over 8 million times. The volume of the requests grew so large that the 110-member electronic surveillance team couldn't keep up. So Sprint automated the process by developing a web interface that gives agents direct access to users' location data. Right? It's like Google Maps behind a password protected website. You log in, you type in a phone number, you see where the person is right then. Right? So police can see where you are from the comfort of their desk. They don't need to go and trail you, they just pin you. In addition to the requests for individuals, it is increasingly common for the government to seek the location of the community of interest. This is a term that came from the computer science community. AT&T originally wanted to see if they could predict fraud amongst their customers, and they theorized that people who had been called by other people who had engaged in fraud would themselves be more likely to engage in fraud. So AT&T has this extensive database of who's calling whom, going out several layers, several hops, and so the phone companies are disclosing this to law enforcement. If your information is requested, they also request the location information of everyone you've called or everyone who's called you. As a matter of policy, they just get this. It's the same, it doesn't take any more work for law enforcement agencies to request this. It's easy, they get it, maybe they use the data, maybe they don't. And in addition to the yes?
Sorry, I was just going to ask, so for any kind of access that is made on this data, is there any auditing that is done after the fact to look at whether there's some justification to the access?
No. Yes?
How is this going to be affected by things like Google Voice, which gives you one number but that forwards to other places? So your incoming call is always coming through a proxy.
But the call is, so are you talking about for intercepts?
Yes.
So Verizon is still handling your call, even if it's coming through Google Voice. Verizon is still capable of intercepting your call. In fact, I think a more interesting question is, what about Skype on Verizon phones? Right, so we have this app that in theory should be doing encrypted calls. And actually what Verizon did, so Verizon is actually one of the worst companies in the US on privacy. The company, I think there's a slide about this later, but Verizon actually argued before the court that they had a First Amendment right to share their customers' data with the NSA. It was Verizon's free speech right to give the government your data. And so Verizon, when they cut a deal with Skype, the call from the Skype app on your phone first goes over Verizon's voice network to a server in Verizon's data center in the clear, and then it gets encrypted and sent through the Skype network. That thus ensuring that Verizon is always capable of intercepting Skype calls by its mobile users. All right, so real-time intercepts, non-content requests, location, stored communications, right? So the emails that are in your Gmail inbox. So stored communications include email inbox, documents stored in the cloud, search queries, blog posts that are password protected, instant messaging if saved by the provider, and archived text messages. So what we know comes primarily from the companies themselves. Google is actually great here. They have this tool on their website where they disclose stats every 6 months revealing how many requests they get. Google's getting about 3,500 requests every 6 months. We have a few other data points. So in May of 2009, Facebook was getting 10 to 20 requests a day, but that was when they had, I think, 150 million users. Now they're up to 600 or 700 million users, so who knows how many requests they're getting. In 2006, AOL was getting 1,000 requests a month, but that was when AOL actually had customers. I don't know how many requests they get now. Yes?
Will anybody who's a target of such a request ever know about that?
For requests for content, I think they are required to tell you, depending on what kind of request it is. If they use a warrant, I don't think they need to tell you. But if Fred, do you know this?
They do not have to tell you.
But if the messages are in storage and they're over 180 days old, and then they seek delayed notice, eventually you get notice, right?
I don't know that you ever get notice. It's only if they want. I don't think you ever get notice.
Okay, so again, no notice. In June 2010, during a peer-to-peer file sharing lawsuit, Time Warner, the cable ISP, disclosed that they were getting about 500 IP address lookups every month, nearly all of which come from law enforcement. And Verizon actually has released the most information. They get 90,000 requests a year from federal, state, and local officials. About 35,000 of these are from federal, and 54,000 are from state. Now, we know how many wiretaps there are. We know sort of a ballpark of how many pen registers there are. Many of these requests are going to be for non-content information. These are going to be for stored text messages or subscriber information. That's, I think, where many of the thousands of requests of Verizon are coming from. You have a question? Or just sort of put your hand up. So this is, you can't see this yet, but I'll zoom in. This is something I got via FOIA that I haven't made public yet. It's going to be coming out soon. I have a DOJ agency that actually keeps a database of every request they make to every ISP. So this is their 2006 spreadsheet. You can see that Yahoo and Hotmail are sort of the big recipients, the big winners of the surveillance requests from this agency. Fast forward to 2010, MySpace. MySpace is by far the largest recipient of requests back then. So I don't know what's happened now that everyone's ditching MySpace. I don't know if now Facebook is the big winner. But it's clear, and at least for this agency, that they've moved entirely, like 90% of their resources have shifted from email providers to MySpace. So Dana Boyd, who's a fantastic privacy researcher, has this theory about white flight on social networks. He talks about how all the poor kids are using MySpace, all the rich kids are using Facebook, and given that most law enforcement investigations are into poor and minorities, it sort of makes sense that MySpace is the leading recipient of these. What's unfortunate is that MySpace has such a crappy position on privacy issues. They will bend over backwards to help law enforcement agencies. Yes?
I just need clarification on the warrants. Is the same kind of warrant used for any request, or most of these requests don't require a warrant?
So the law is really complex. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act dates from 1986, when we had like 2 megabyte inboxes, and we're not storing everything in the cloud. If you want content, you need a certain kind of order with a higher degree of evidence. You need a probable cause warrant, unless the information is over 180 days old, or you've opened it at least once. Non-content information can be accessed with a much lesser order. It's complex. This area of the law, I mean, this area of the law and sort of tax law are like vying for most confusing in the legal field. Yes, Mike?
When you're pulling these FOIA requests, are they getting you scans of printouts?
Yes, it sucks. There's no PDF search for the FOIA documents. And actually, just last week, I got 45 pages of surveillance invoices from the US Secret Service to telcos, the different telecom companies, detailing how much money paid for which investigations when. The FOIA, I love FOIA. It's great. I wish more PhD students use it. You have to sort of plan ahead. Right? It takes me a year and a half to get data back, but the stuff I get is fantastic. And you know, as a PhD student, I'll give you 1 second. As a PhD student, you're always looking for original data, right? When you're FOIAing stuff, you have data that no one else has. And I mean, I think these kinds of things are sort of sexy. Maybe people think they're boring, but I think it's really fun just to actually see which companies are getting requests.
I was just wondering, how much is it costing you? Because I know
Nothing.
recently Michigan, the
So state open records law and federal open records laws are different.
Okay.
But FOIA, the federal law, has a fee waiver for members of the press and researchers working in the public interest. And I claim both an academic research exception and I claim a press exemption. I'm a blogger, and no one has wanted to fight with me over whether bloggers are members of the media. So I never pay for anything. Yes?
I was just wondering, so when you do get these documents from FOIA, like, what is the, like, can you share them with other researchers?
Yeah, they all eventually go up on my website. I mean, when I'm saying I'm a researcher working in the public interest, or I'm a member of the press, the justification there is I am disseminating these to the public. That's why they're giving them to me. If I were just using them for my own personal uses, they wouldn't waive the fees. Because it costs them money to like do the searches and then redact them. Those black boxes are really expensive to draw, and there are so many of those black boxes. So I just submitted a request about 1.5 years ago for surveillance documentation related to location information, and DOJ found 400 pages of information and refused to give me a single page. So I'm probably going to have to sue them in federal court next month, and it's going to cost me $350. So I may be having a bake sale soon.
Yeah.
All right, so those are the numbers that we know, right? Then let's move on to in which technical ways, as computer scientists, in which technical ways do service providers differ on privacy? So first, email headers. I assume I don't need to tell people in this room how email headers work, but this is the non-content information that goes along with the email. Most modern clients don't show this. The important thing to note is that the webmail systems that we use, in many cases, include additional information that they're not required to by the technical standards. And so both Hotmail and Yahoo include the IP address of the user who's sending the email with the outgoing messages. There's no technical standard that requires that they do this. They just choose to do this. Google, on the other hand, doesn't include this information. Google, I mean, they have to include the IP address of the server that they're sending the message from. But they don't need to include your personal mobile computer or your personal laptop computer's IP address. Well, why don't Microsoft and Yahoo do this? The answer is this reduces the number of requests they get from law enforcement agencies. They don't have to handle which IP address sent this nasty email, which IP address sent this bomb threat to a school. Because anytime the school receives one of these emails, they can look in the header, immediately look at the IP address, and then the police can call up Comcast and say which person was using this. In addition to the email providers, Facebook was doing this too. So between 2006 and 2009, Facebook's email system, so whenever you would poke someone or like something that they were doing, you would generate an automatic email to the recipient of the poke, and those emails included the IP address of the person who had initiated the action. I think it's quite interesting that the Facebook's internal email system, their email server was called Zuckmail. Anyway, so in 2009, at some point, 2009, Facebook changed their system so that they were no longer including the raw IP address, and they base64 encoded it. Sort of the equivalent of the Caesar cipher, right? Like it's trivial to reverse this. And then there was a big controversy, and they stopped doing this, I think, in late 2010. Right, so take yourselves out of our US perspective for a second, and let's imagine that you are a human rights activist in Zimbabwe. Microsoft doesn't respond to requests from the Zimbabwean government. Neither does Facebook. No one responds to requests from the North Korean government. If you're a Zimbabwean human rights activist and you're using Hotmail, and you send something and one of your emails gets captured, the Zimbabwean government can look through the email, see the IP address, and then go to your local ISP and find out who sent it. If a Zimbabwean activist uses Gmail, the trail ends right there. This is a really significant difference, and you wouldn't find out about this by reading the company's documentation or the privacy policy or watching any of the 40 videos on Google's YouTube privacy channel. But this is a substantive difference. Let's also talk about IP addresses for mobile users. So we all have cell phones in our pockets, and everyone has a smartphone in here, I suspect. And they're all connected to the internet, and so they all have IP addresses. So Sprint, they statically assign IP addresses to all handsets. They keep allocation records for 24 months. They also save URL browsing history for 24 months. They keep the information, and they said, well, so this is Sprint's electronic surveillance manager talking a couple of years ago. We don't start because law enforcement asked us to store it. We start because when we launched our 3G in 2001, we thought we were going to be billing by the megabyte. But ultimately, that's why we store the data. It's because marketing wants to rifle through the data. Sprint is keeping all this data, and of course, law enforcement can and does request it. Has anyone seen the movie Field of Dreams? Kevin Costner, right? This really cheesy film. But there's this quote from Field of Dreams, right? Build it and they will come. If you save it, they will come. Law enforcement agencies love this data. So Sprint assigns static IP addresses to their handsets. Cricket, which is a prepaid carrier aiming primarily at low-income users, from the outside, from the point of capture of the IP address, is the generic or regional IP address is picked up. There is no way to come back through our firewall to see what that subscriber has had a per session identifier. And that's something that even if you go to level 3, our uplink provider, they're not going to have that information either. So Cricket uses what's called NAT, network address translation. You use this on your home wireless router, except that they use it for thousands of users. So for Cricket, every user in a town has the same IP address. And Cricket's not the only one. T-Mobile does the same as Cricket. So if you're a T-Mobile user and you leave a nasty comment on someone's blog, or you download a file via peer-to-peer on your mobile broadband connection, T-Mobile doesn't know who's doing what. If they receive a request from law enforcement agencies, T-Mobile is not in a position. They say, sorry, we don't know. We can tell you that this came from Bloomington, but after that, we know nothing. AT&T and Verizon also give static IP addresses, or they at least give unique IP addresses to their users. And so if you are a mobile user, picking T-Mobile is a really, really big way to improve your privacy. The problem is, if you walk into Best Buy or Radio Shack and you're trying to pick a phone, they'll say, oh, well, these guys have the iPhone, these guys have the Droid. Your friends and family are using this one, and you can call them for less. But they won't tell you about the privacy differences. There's no way to find out which company will better protect your privacy or whose architecture is more privacy preserving. But these are real differences. Now, many of you know that T-Mobile is being purchased by AT&T. AT&T, of course, went out of its way to assist the NSA in their warrantless wiretapping program, and so AT&T does not have a very privacy-preserving system. It's very likely that once the merger goes through, if it's approved by the Justice Department, I think, or I think that's who's doing the antitrust review, that T-Mobile will merge into the mothership, and T-Mobile users will again start having unique IP addresses.
I was going to ask, is there an economic incentive for AT&T and Sprint to not do this, or T-Mobile to do this? Is it because IP addresses are really costly and that is somehow cheaper? And the other question was, I understand why AT&T would not advertise the fact that, well, we are crappy, but why doesn't T-Mobile go out of its way to advertise, yes, we are not a big service provider, but this is what we, this is the value-added service that we provide.
So T-Mobile didn't do this for privacy reasons. This is actually sort of a side effect of their network design. T-Mobile is the only wireless carrier in the US that is also not a tier 1 backbone provider. So AT&T provide their own backhaul to the internet. AT&T has fiber all over the country. Sprint bought what used to be Unet, I think. I think Sprint bought them. Maybe it was Verizon. But Sprint and Verizon are also huge tier 1 backbone providers. So they have so many IP addresses, they're never going to run out. T-Mobile isn't a tier 1 backbone provider. They're just a telco, relatively small telco in sort of the grand scheme of things. And they have 50 million customers. And so for them to go out and buy 50 million IP addresses, especially in today's market, it's going to cost some real money. Now, they could have done this years ago, but so because they don't provide their own backhaul, they go to a company called Level 3. And they went to Level 3 and they said, give us a data connection to our mobile users. And Level 3 probably said, this is how much we'll charge you if we give you the same IP for every user in a city, and this is how much we'll charge you if you want every user to have a unique IP address. And T-Mobile said, well, we'll go for the cheap one, please. Right? That makes sense. Why are you going to pay money for something that isn't going to bring you any benefit? So that's why they have it for historical reasons. Law enforcement obviously isn't very happy, and in fact, there was a hearing in the House of Representatives this February about the topic of data retention, and DOJ, without mentioning which carrier, said there was one carrier that was not retaining this information. They're sort of shaking their fist at them. Why T-Mobile doesn't advertise this? I don't know. I would think that differentiating on privacy would be an interesting thing. We haven't really seen companies competing on privacy yet, and now that AT&T is going to get purchased, I don't think it's going to happen in this space. And another way that companies differ on privacy is HTTPS. Right, so many of you are probably familiar with Firesheet, but this is obviously not the first tool that lets you intercept wireless communications and hijack accounts. So in 2010, Google made the brave, bold move to deploy HTTPS by default for Gmail users, and then Google Docs and Google Calendar and a few other things. And they said, in 2010, we're the only one to do it. We hope that other companies will soon join our lead. Well, companies haven't really followed their lead yet. Twitter, Facebook, and even Google Search don't offer HTTPS by default. I think they all offer HTTPS as an option, but you have to go out of your way to use it. Yahoo, MySpace, and Bing don't even offer HTTPS at all. So there's certainly differences here, and not all companies are equal, but you wouldn't know it from visiting their front pages. Well, maybe SSL is expensive, right? Maybe that's why Bing isn't using HTTPS by default. It takes zero money to deploy HTTPS, according to Google. So this is Google's main SSL engineer, Adam Langley, who writes the server code and also writes the Chrome SSL code. He said that in order to enable SSL by default, we had to deploy no additional machines and no special hardware. On our front-end machines, SSL accounts for less than 1% of the CPU load, less than 10K of memory per connection, and less than 2% of network overhead. SSL is not expensive at the enterprise level anymore. It used to be, 10 years ago, but there's really no excuse for companies like Microsoft to not be encrypting data in transit by default. And this makes a big difference, right? If you're at Starbucks and you're logging into your Facebook account, the person sitting next to you can hack into your account using trivial, off-the-shelf tools, point and click. It's a disgrace that these companies are not doing this. And I think it's great that Google is doing it, but more should be doing this. In addition to the encryption of data in transit, there's also encryption of data in storage. So there are several companies that are providing online backups of various things. So Mozilla has this thing called Firefox Sync. It's built into Firefox 4.0. It synchronizes your bookmarks and cookies between your browser at home and your browser at work. Mozilla encrypts all the data with a key that only you have. So Mozilla doesn't know which web pages you're going to. It's worth noting that one of Mozilla's main security guys is a IU CS PhD graduate, Sid Stam, who just graduated a couple of years ago, who's worked on that. There's two online cloud-based backup services, TarSnap and SpiderOak. I use SpiderOak, I love it, that encrypt your data with a key that only you have. I don't know how many of you have been watching the press recently, but it came out about a week and a half ago that Dropbox, while they encrypt your data, they have a single key for everyone's data, and that they can and will disclose your data to law enforcement agencies. So there is a big difference between cloud-based backup services. So there are differences, right, for these companies. There are technical differences. There are also sort of policy differences, still regarding technology, with regard to the data they retain. So this is a table of some information that I've gotten from various sources. These are the IP address, data retention policies, and account registration policies. You can see that Microsoft retains stuff for 60 days, Yahoo retains it for 6 months, MySpace is retaining stuff for a year, Time Warner for 6 months. In the data retention periods, while it doesn't really matter the specifics here, what I want you to take away from this is that the policies do vary. You can't just go to a website and assume, oh, they're keeping my data for 30 days or for a year. It's really whatever the lawyers at that company decide, and they don't tell you what their data retention policies are. I only have these because of leaks and off-the-record conversations with company lawyers. Right? They don't tell you when you go to their privacy policy. Yes?
What do you think about Google and Gmail in general in terms of privacy? Because Gmail generates advertisements based on your own content, and your email might be secure, but what about the ads they generate based on that, and how private and secure?
So there are different aspects of privacy, right? There's commercial privacy, and there's my area, which is government access to data. So I use Gmail, but I don't actually use Gmail's free service. I pay them $50 a year. I don't see any ads. They don't scan my email for ads. And the reason is I really like Google's outside lawyers. And I feel like if I pay them $50 a year, maybe I'll get the premium package when they receive a subpoena. That's my hope. I mean, they're also the only company that has even offered some modicum of encryption to their users. And I feel, there's no one else that I happen to like more. I don't want to set up and maintain my own servers. I don't want to be having to do tech support at 3 in the morning. And so if I'm going to use someone, I happen to like Google's services. I wouldn't use Hotmail. I definitely wouldn't use Yahoo. There are other paid services that maybe you would like. I mean, the advertising issues are very separate. And while I think there are interesting issues that are raised there, it's sort of beyond the scope of my immediate concerns with regard to this research. There are incidental that there are actually legal questions as to whether you lose some protection under the law when your email provider is scanning your email for anything other than sort of antivirus and spam. If they're searching your email for ads, there are theories that suggest that you lose some protection. The government can get your information with even less of an order because you've then sort of provided consent for other uses of your email. There are interesting questions there. So many of you might know that there's sort of been a back and forth in the search engine community over how long they're going to retain data. European regulators have pressured the search engines. Microsoft now anonymizes search logs after 6 months. Google is horrible and deceptive. They say that they anonymize data, but they actually just delete the last octet of the IP address. And most users don't know what an octet is, so they say, oh, they're anonymizing my data. Yahoo was deleting the IP addresses after 90 days, and then just last month said, oh, you know what, things have changed, we're not going to keep it for 18 months. So Yahoo is really, I don't know what they're doing, but I'm not happy with that change. It's important to know that these policies do not protect your data from the government. So this is Google's Deputy Counsel Nicole Wong in 2007 saying, our new data retention policy shouldn't affect many investigations since the 2-year time limit seems to be at the outer edge of what police want. Most police are interested in logs that are a day or two old, right? So whether it's a 30-day data retention policy or a 90-day or 6-month, doesn't matter. Police are getting the logs that they need and want. This is Microsoft's Chief Privacy Officer, or maybe I forget what's Peter Collins' title now, something higher.
Chief Strategist.
Chief Strategist. So this is New York Times. This is him telling the New York Times why they have not adopted a zero data retention policy. He argued that too much privacy was actually dangerous. Anonymized search, he said, can become a haven for child predators. Right? Microsoft is proactively keeping data just in case you happen to be a pedophile. Did someone have a question? I saw a hand. No? All right. So the problem with retaining the data is it's very, very easy to start retaining even more. And you'd never know about it because these companies don't describe their data retention practices. So I've gotten copies of law enforcement investigations guides. These are handbooks that they produce for law enforcement. I've gotten copies of these. They've been leaked. They've showed up on the internet. So this is MySpace's 2006 guide at the top. And this is MySpace's 2007 guide at the bottom. The important thing is in 2006, they were retaining data for 90 days. 2007, they started retaining data for 1 year. As a MySpace user, how would you know this? They don't tell you. It's not in their privacy policy. They don't send out an update to their users. If we didn't have these law enforcement handbooks, we would never know. And certainly most users don't know this today. But this is, again, this is something that the company has complete control over. If they don't want to retain data, they don't have to. And the fact that they're choosing to retain it really impacts your privacy because it makes it's there for law enforcement officials. It's there for civil litigants. You know, this is a ticking time bomb. Yes.
What are the odds that these companies aren't even adhering to their own policies that they're not publicizing in the first place? In other words, can we really be sure that after 90 days or 1 year, MySpace is deleting their retention logs, or is it possible that they're not doing?
Oh, it's almost certainly in some cases they're keeping them for longer because they're not disclosing this to their customers. There's no angle for FTC enforcement. If the companies were saying, we delete your data at 6 months, and then they in fact kept it for 2 years, the FTC could say that was an unfair business practice. But no one knows what they're doing. So if they choose to keep it for longer, no harm. Mike?
So it seems like this retention introduces overhead, software and like hardware. Why, I mean, if the DOJ isn't affecting policy, or making policy, I guess, why are they so keen to cooperate?
Okay, well, you have a Gmail account, right?
Yeah.
How much do you pay for your Gmail account? What, do you use Facebook?
I mean, yeah.
Do you pay for Facebook?
Right.
Okay, so these companies are trying to eke out some value, right? You're not paying with your money, you're paying with your data. Companies don't really know how they can extract value, but they think at some point their awesome research teams might figure out how to extract value. Cost of storage is approaching nil. The cost of paying an engineer to write code to delete the data is actually something. So keep it.
So it's for data mining internally, and it's an external benefit that the government
Yes.
can get access to.
Well, I mean, DOJ does sort of wave their fist and threaten to impose data retention legislation. That's enough to sort of get the responsible companies to save stuff, even if they weren't using it for internal purposes. But I think most of the retention is primarily for data mining and revenue extraction purposes. Yes.
I was just going to ask, like, I'm familiar with the United States, but like, don't you have like any kind of consumer protection agency who would be aware of something like this and say that it is kind of like, even though the policies say that they're subject to change without notice, isn't there like a consumer protection agency who would try to advocate the cause for consumers?
So I mean, as Fred said, I worked at the FTC for a year. That is the only consumer protection agency we have in this country. And data retention issues is not something that's on their agenda. Data retention is by and large an issue that the Canadians and Europeans are focused on. And in Europe, they have this crazy scheme where the privacy officials are saying you need to retain data for less time, and then the national security officials are saying we want mandatory data retention. And so in Europe, you have to retain some data for, I think, 6 or 9 months. Email providers and telephone companies do retain logs there. So, but again, in the US, data retention is not an issue. There's no law, so companies are not required to disclose this to anyone. Was there? Yes.
So the point you made was, since you're getting Gmail and Facebook for free, one part of this data, and data is value for them, and so. But what about the companies where you're getting something and it's not free? So Amazon and eBay, they're getting value from you in other ways, and they don't necessarily have to rely on this data. Do they then have better policies?
No, actually, eBay has one of the worst privacy policies in the business. eBay bends over backwards to help law enforcement agencies.
So then why do you think that is the case? That they don't?
Because they want to extract additional revenue.
In fact, with Amazon, it seems Amazon really gets reviews from both. So the one hand, they get reviews from customers, because customers buy things. On the other hand, they get reviews from other advertisers, just like Gmail and France.
Well, Amazon doesn't take third-party advertising. You're not going to see a banner ad on Amazon for someone else. But Amazon uses the data to try and improve their own recommendation algorithms in the hope that then they can trick you into buying something or convince you to buy something new.
In fact, they do have ads for other people.
Really? I've never seen a banner ad on Amazon.
Not the banner ad, but the bottom or page something. I used to work.
They suggest products, but they don't. Amazon won't take. You won't click on a link from Amazon and go to someone else's website. They want you to stay there.
They do.
Really? Okay. I'm wrong. Was there another question? Then I want to sort of wrap this up soon because we have 5 minutes left. All right, and then quickly, non-technical policies that can protect privacy. So before it was all engineering-led decisions. Emergency requests. Right, so before I describe these different kinds of court order that can be used to get your data. However, if the government says this is an issue of life or death, right, if they say that this involves the death or serious physical injury of a person, US law permits ISPs to voluntarily, not compelled, but voluntary disclosure of customers' content and records. This means no warrant, no subpoena, no court order. Well, how many requests are there? Not many, according to the stats. And there are some stats. So DOJ is required to publish statistics regarding the emergency requests by DOJ agencies, emergency requests for content. It does not include state requests, those by other federal agencies. This also does not include requests for non-content data, such as customer records, dialed numbers. Now the reports that we have, and by the way, these are not published on the web anywhere, and they're not subject to, I guess it would be subject to FOIA, but I'm still waiting, so I got them leaked from people in Capitol Hill instead. They reveal less than 20 emergency requests a year. That doesn't sound bad, right? 20 requests, now we're getting 12,000 pen registers. That shouldn't be a big problem. So in 2007, Verizon published some stats. I mentioned these before. So they get 90,000 requests a year. 25,000 of Verizon's requests are emergency requests. More than 1/4 of the requests that Verizon gets are emergency requests for which there are no court orders. Now what's interesting is only 300 of these are federal requests. So maybe, in DOJ's case, they have 20 that they're disclosing. Probably, they're getting a bunch more that are for non-content, and then there are a bunch of other ones from other federal agencies. But, it's probably less than a couple thousand emergency requests a year. But the states are making huge numbers. Well, why are they doing this? My theory here is that, you make someone do a lot of paperwork, get a court order, harass a judge to get information the normal way. If you can just say there's an emergency, even if it is sort of an emergency situation, they're always going to go for the path that has least resistance. Right? Why deal with a judge when you can just call up the company? However, companies are not required to disclose in emergencies. As the Internet Service Provider Association tells its members, there is never an emergency obligation on an ISP to disclose. The company can always say no, and then the government can always return with a subpoena or court order. And so a company's policy on emergency requests is one of the most useful indicators of its overall commitment to privacy because they can say no. However, no one talks about it. Right? No one wants to say, we said no when there was a missing child, and then the police had to go and get the court order, and by the time they had the court order, the child was dead. You don't want that kind of PR. So companies do say no on some occasions, but they don't want to talk about it. This is super, super hush-hush. I guess I'm missing the slide, but there, No, I have it in here. All right, so, and then the last sort of thing I want to talk about before I run out of time is the cost of surveillance. So companies are legally committed to pass along the cost to the government. This includes overtime labor, the capital cost of surveillance equipment. Sprint has more than 100 employees working on surveillance. That's not free. You know, those people have salaries and pensions. They got to be paid. So you know the costs for these wiretaps are pretty expensive. This is pen register costs. These are anonymized from the DOJ Inspector General. So we're looking at between $2,000 and $3,000 for a 1-month pen register. Wiretaps for 30 days are similarly in the $3,000 range for some carriers. These are not cheap. However, not everyone charges. So everyone waives the fees for child exploitation cases. No one wants to be seen as profiting from a child porn case. This makes sense. It's probably not that many requests. It's good PR. However, Facebook, MySpace, and Microsoft don't charge at all for any investigations. Facebook has told me that it would be too much work to have to chase up the invoices. Can you imagine a company saying, oh, it's too difficult to get our customers to pay, so we're just going to give out free services? But this is their policy. They give stuff away. But there are benefits to the public if the government has to pay for surveillance. It might seem a little strange to want the government to have to pay for your data. Why should companies profit from disclosing your data? But there are actually good things. So this, again, is telecom lawyer Al Gadari, who represents the phone companies and Google and Microsoft and Facebook. When records are free, such as with telephone toll records, law enforcement overconsumes with abandon. But when service providers charge for extracting data, such as log file searches, law enforcement requests are more tailored. Right? When you're a police officer and you have to justify the request to your boss, you request less. When it's free and you don't have to get permission to hit the budget, you just fire off the request. It's easy. So about 4 years ago, Al gave a speech, and which sort of inspired the work that I'm doing in my dissertation. He said, when I can follow the money, I know how much of something is being consumed. How many wiretaps? How many pen registers? How many customer records? Couple that with reporting, and at least you have the opportunity to look at and know what's going on. And so for the past few years, I've been filing FOIA after FOIA to get the invoices, to get the spreadsheets detailing how many requests are being made. Again, because we don't have official reporting, I figure at least I can follow the money. And so I've gotten copies of invoices. This is an invoice from Google to the US Marshal Service, $25 for your inbox. This is a request from Yahoo. Yahoo has some very interesting pricing. So on the first request, we have $20.39. Following request, we have $20.41. Now, why does surveillance increase by 2 cents? The cost of the stamp. Whenever the Postal Service raises the cost of stamps, Yahoo's surveillance prices go up by the same amount of money. They're billing the government for the postage stamp. I think this is sort of cool. All right, anyway, in conclusion, we don't know much about the true scale of internet and wireless surveillance. We know about phone intercepts. We don't know much about most of the majority of surveillance. However, we know it's probably very large. There are many, many things that companies can do to protect their users, but unfortunately, most don't. Thank you. I can probably take another 10 minutes of questions if there are any. Otherwise, I can jump in my limo and go to the airport. Anyone? Yes.
I have one question, which is, so the argument for retaining data for cases with pedophiles has been used, like I've heard that one often. But there are any statistics which show that, okay, there were these many number of cases where that kind of data collection actually critically allowed for prosecution?
No. There are no stats regarding requests to internet service providers for any forms of data. In fact, I wrote a bill that would do this, and I'm hoping it will get passed at some point in the next year or two. We desperately need those kinds of stats, and unfortunately, because there are no stats, law enforcement can say, so they have said that the majority of requests to internet service providers are for child pornography investigations, which I think is complete crap. Because we don't have real data, we have no way of disputing that. Right, but one of the things that you do see in sort of Fourth Amendment cases is that the majority of cases involve either drugs or pedophilia, and that's because law enforcement wants to push the bar, push the margin with the courts on those kinds of cases, right? You want the really, really bad guy. You don't want the union organizer to be your suspect. You want the guy with 20 kilos of coke in the trunk. Anyone else? No? All right, well, thank you very much. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, quick question. Since it looks like they will believe any sort of data available that's collected like this, what sort of tools are available to inject fake data?
To inject fake data where?
Into like wiretap requests and things like this.
I mean, so they're getting your phone line, so you can obviously make fake calls or get a call directory inquiries. But you know, if you want to generate fake search requests, you can, you know, have there's software that exists. I think one of them is called Track Me Not that lets you generate fake search queries. But you know, it's impossible to generate fake location data because you're carrying your phone around with you at all times. You can give your phone to your spouse, but then they're tracking them, or you can leave it on the bus, but then it's tough to get it back. It's tough. You know, you can encrypt. One of the trends we're seeing is you can encrypt your data, but it's tough to get away from the metadata trail, right? Even with encrypted communications, you still have social network analysis that's possible, and NSA is in love with network analysis because of this very reason. And it's really easy to crunch this information without lots of people looking at it. You can do a lot more automated stuff with metadata analysis. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.